Did I forget a book? Why doesn't Goodreads know? Well, that's confusing. Maybe a little bit alarming. Huh. Oh, I found it! Update your tracking documents, my little peepsicles. Do as I say, don't do as I do. And welcome back to another video. In fact, welcome back to the first tops and bottoms of 2025. For those of you who are new here or haven't caught a tops and bottoms in a while, tops and bottoms are the way in which I wrap up my reading month by telling you only about the tippy top, the bestest of the best, and the bottomiest bottoms and worstest of the worsts. Years ago I used to just talk about every book that I read in a month, but on some months, which my statistics reliably inform me can get anywhere between 13 and 19 books, that's just too much time spent on that like middle strata of it was okay, but I probably won't reread it and I'm likely not keeping it, and I'm almost sure you're gonna see it in an unhaul soon. And besides, top and bottoms is just more fun to say. Alright, so let's just get it started by saying that in my head I have always put a lot of pressure on January books. I have tried in previous years to carry some books over so that I'm not starting anything fresh in January, and in other years I've been like, no, we will pick that one perfect book off of your shelf. But regardless of which method I have employed, my statistics tell me that January is usually a crapola month. Reading for me in January is like when you open a new novelty box of cereal and you discover that you got the one dud box that has like, I don't know, 5 Lucky Charms in it, or like, I don't know, I eat really boring Sultana brand, so I've run out of novelty cereal analogies, but you get my point. And this January was no different. In January I filmed a TBR Veterans vlog, and let's just say I have a lot more room on my shelves than I used to. And while I wouldn't usually structure things this way, let's very briefly just talk about which books those were and why I DNF'd them. Let me see if I can do it in a sentence. Okay. In no particular order, I DNF'd The Oleander Sword by Tasha Suri, which I felt didn't really live up to the first book. There were a couple of questions that I had about the plot, and the characters made some choices that I didn't think were necessarily as consistent as they could be with the first book, so this one went. There was The Bash Rock by Evie Wyld, which I was super looking forward to because I have loved some of Evie Wyld's books in the past, but this one just fell flat for me. I went in there looking for the haunting, lingering prose that I had seen in other books, and instead I got a story that I just wasn't invested in and characters whose voices I couldn't differentiate from each other. So that went. Next up, there's In Ascension by Martin McInnes, which quite frankly is a book that never met a sentence it didn't love. And not only could it not bear to give up a single one of those sentences to editing, it crammed all of them into entire page-long paragraphs with very little punctuation. Like, if you think I talk fast and don't take a break, try and read this one. But I mean, actually don't, because it was really incessantly boring and was entirely comprised of minutiae and internal thoughts that really nobody cared about. So that went! And then finally there was the Tokyo Zodiac Murders by Soji Shimada, which to be perfectly fair is here for a reason not like the others. I DNF'd all of the other books this month because there was actively something in it that I didn't like, but for this one it's less that I didn't like it and more that I'm just past my point of reading crime-based fiction. Apart from some of the Golden Age crime that I really love and will continue to read possibly over and over again, this one was modern crime and I just don't read that anymore. I don't like traditional detectives. I don't particularly care for any case which sets itself out as being like largely procedural, and so this one just turned out to be a veteran that had sat on my shelf for long enough that it had made its way out of my wheelhouse and into my unhaul pile. Because this one went. So those were all of the DNFs in January, and I guess technically the first bottoms on this list, although we're going a little bit rogue with the concept at this point. Now let's get to the books that I read all of the way through, cover to cover if you like. We're going to carry on with our theme of the bottoms because there are 3 books that I want to tell you about, nay rant about, in this video. And the first one of those is True Crime Story by Joseph Knox. It feels a bit weird to be talking about this book in isolation because I read it back to back with True Story by Kate Reid Petty. Even the names have started to merge together in my head. I picked both of these up again for that same TBR Veterans vlog, kind of with the idea that I was going to try and clean off my thriller shelf of all of the really old TBR Veterans. And both of these had very similar themes. They are both mixed media. True Crime Story by Joseph Knox is told in interviews and transcribed CCTV, little investigative notes from the 2 authors who worked on it, and it also includes a bunch of photographs of sort of like like the main characters, some of the locations. And then there's True Story by Kate Reid Petty, which is kind of experimental. It is essentially one true crime story which is told in 4 different formats. There's like a college application, there's a movie script, and all of these different methods relate to the different covers that you can see on the front of this book. And so I read them back to back because I thought that that would be like a great act of comparison, especially because both of them landed on my TBR veteran shelf at about the same time. However, this great act of comparison only proved that neither of these stories did anything that I was ever going to like. Which is a shame, because you guys know that I absolutely adore the mixed media format, and I often find that in the structure of these books and the telling of them, the author gives you perspectives that you wouldn't get in a traditionally written book, because they have to find ways to convey the characters and the secrets to you and different character voices without any of those characters actually walking or talking on the page in a lot of instances. True Crime Story was one of those books that just felt like the author was narrating them. Like every single character just sounded the same. And I actually picked up these two specifically because I also had them on audiobook, and True Crime Story is a cast audiobook, and even with the cast, the author's voice was still suffocatingly there. And even when we were trying to like present a class divide by the use of language, it just never quite made it over the line for me. But there were a bunch of other things that I hated about True Crime Story, and predominantly the problem with all of them is that they were intensely male gazy. This is supposed to be the story of a young college student who goes missing. She has like walked out of her dorms and she's just never seen from again. And 2 true crime authors are piecing together the story of how this happened, and one of them is essentially a self-insert of the author. So Joseph Knox appears within this book as the true crime author who is putting all of these manuscript pieces together, and Joseph Knox is obviously the actual author of this book. And I thought that that was a really cool concept at first, until I started reading it and discovering that actually it was just kind of ick, because it made it really difficult to separate what was the author's views from the characters, and that was really problematic in a few cases. Then there's also the fact that this woman's disappearance is really viewed through the lens of the men who were around her and who were in a few different varieties of ways interested in her. There is a mistaken twins plotline in this, because the girl who has gone missing is one of a set of twins, and there is an intimate incident involving one twin who is mistaken for the other, and it is grim. And I can't help but think that if that was anybody but a cisgendered white man in that situation, that wouldn't have happened. And then on top of that, just to further the male gaze of it all, the only characters who are female who get interviewed about the disappearance of this main character is one person who is clearly framed as this like weird stalker friend. She's a busybody, she's in everybody's lives, and she can be seen to be stirring the pot quite a lot of the time. And then the missing girl's sister, who despite the fact that she misses her sister is very resentful about a lot of things that her sister did. And again, it felt very like the point of view of Community of women of any format being written by a man. All of the women were in competition with each other in some sort of way. Talking about women in competition, this book is written as if one true crime author, a female true crime author, started writing this book and then something awful has happened to her, and this male crime author, Joseph Knox, is then picking it up. And right at the very beginning, he's like, look, I'm gonna admit to you, when she was trying to pitch this to me, when she was trying to get me to read chapters in the beginning, I was firmly into second book syndrome. I just couldn't be dealing with her, and quite frankly I knew that I didn't actually have to reply to her because she was going to keep coming back to me for casual sex anyway. And the fact that this was meant to be put in there as like a, oh, I so regret my actions, I wish that I'd paid more attention to her when she was alive, a confession that's meant to make the reader sympathetic to Joseph Knox is, I mean, you do you, my friend. When somebody tells you who they are, believe them the first time. So yeah, all in all, this one was a massive fail. But then I carried on to True Story by Kate Reid Petty because I thought this is going to be the antidote to this other book. The entire book is set up to be the true account of what actually happened to the author when they were in college, and by that I mean like the author of all of these scripts and interconnected narratives, not that this is another self-insert, I mean like the main character. But unfortunately, not only was this book boring as hell and took so long to get to any kind of point, in any of these sections, but somehow it was again aggressively male gazy. The main character's narrative is woven in between all of these sections of the two guys who were in the car that night giving their account of events. And because their account is very much a straight to the camera kind of thing, like me talking to you, it's a direct to the reader, you are getting all of their horrible toxic opinions about what's okay and what women deserve and how it all got brushed under the carpet for them because they are star athletes and they knew that nothing was ever going to happen. And it's really grim because essentially the main character never really gets her own narrative voice because her story is told in these fractured narratives of like scripts and things like that, which is really the secondary issue with this, and that's that none of those were interesting. This gave me the same feeling that I get from short story collections where I will start a short story and the concept is interesting and maybe the way that the story is told is interesting, but by the time that I'm invested in the characters there's a twist and the story is over and we need to start the whole thing over again, and that's just not my jam. I don't enjoy it. There were some sections of this where I was just like, why am I here? It was also a little bit like consistently reading schoolwork, which was exactly one of the issues that I had with The Examiner by Janice Hallett. I mean, there were a lot of other issues like ableism and blatant racism, but you know, that one was one of the big issues that I had, that I was just reading people's schoolwork and I don't know why I care. But the thing that really just finished this book out for me, the thing that made me rate it like, I don't know, a 2-star. I can't talk about the last thing without actively talking about spoilers about this book, so I'm going to put a little like spoiler thing down here. Okay, are you gone? If you're not on your own head, be it. Curiosity killed the reader or something. The conclusion of this book is essentially the two boys made the entire thing up. And it was just such a stupid and damaging conclusion to this entire narrative. And I'm not gonna lie, you can watch back the vlog and see this. There is a point wherein I realised what was going on, or at least what I thought was going to happen, and I was like, this best not be the thing that happens, and it was. Apart from anything else, can we just agree that sexual assault should not be the twist in any twisty thrillers? And do you know what, I guess let's just talk about the final bottom on this list and then we can talk about the two tops, because there are actually two books that I read in January that I really love, and one of them was a huge surprise to me. But in the same way that that one was a huge surprise, so was this one. It was a huge surprise how disappointing it was. In fact, I was buddy reading this with one of my lovely friends and we both took almost 2 months to get through this book, which is objectively not that large because we just could not make ourselves pick it up. We both got to roughly the same part in the middle and we're just like, nah. And sadly, that book is Didion and Babbitts. Now this book is a little bit of a niche one for my channel. I mean, ostensibly it is kind of like a biography come memoir of these two women, so it's not too out of my wheelhouse, but it's definitely not something that I think that you would expect to see here in my tops and bottoms. But this one showed up because of one of my hyperfixation special interests, and that is Joan Didion. And not just Joan Didion, but other authors who existed at the time that she did, writing very much about places like California in the 60s. This book was not only not as advertised, but also a bit freaking weird. The premise of this book essentially is that Joan Didion and Eve Babbitts were contemporaries of each other, but they were two very different kinds of journalists and writers, and they very much rubbed up against each other at various points in their career, and both loved in a frenemy kind of way and absolutely loathed the other. Before Eve Babbitts passed away, the author of this one also interviewed her extensively over a long period for a book called Hollywood's Eve. And after Eve passes away, Eve's family contacts the author again to say, hey, when we were cleaning out her apartment, we found some very like lovingly taped together, shoved at the back of a wardrobe boxes, and they were all full of letters between these two women. And so this book was meant to be a look at those letters and a sort of like piecing together of the narrative of what happened in between them. And it was just very not that. When we talk about the idea of parasocial relationships and being obsessed with celebrities or any kind of like figure that we see on our TV or on our phones essentially, we are talking about the author of this book. In the introduction, the author is very, very clear that they were obsessed with Eve Babbitt in an unhealthy way, and that the writing of Hollywood's Eve kind of got that out of their system. But that when this box appeared, they spiraled right back into that place, and all of those old feelings of like abandoning their kids and their husband and their own life to kind of exist in the space between these women's correspondences just appeared again for them. And the introduction to this book was perfect. It was 5 stars. It was amazing. I was so excited. It also presented a couple of fragments of letters between the two as like a little taste of what you were going to get in the rest of the book. But unfortunately, that was not what we got in the rest of the book, because instead what we got was the author essentially rehashing a bunch of things that they had already said about Eve Babbitt in previous publications in a way that was very clearly like, this is the Eve Babbitt show and Joan Didion is just here to be the villain, and a bunch of super weird, seriously judgmental takes on the way that Joan Didion lived her life. And Nulik actually uses the word fetish in this book in a couple of different places to describe the relationship that she has with Eve, and that is very what I felt like I was reading. I felt that I was overhearing somebody's internal thoughts in a way where it was like, oh, you said the quiet part out loud. Like I was listening to somebody's internal thoughts, like they were having a very like catty, gossipy, judgmental bitch session in their own head about these two women, one of which they clearly do not like. And it was presented in a way that honestly made me feel a little bit, I don't want to say like dirty reading it, but it made me feel like I was guilty by association of the kind of like anti-feminist pitting two extremely accomplished women against each other to say that one was like the morally superior of the two way, and it was super uncomfortable. And one of the more worrying things about this book was some of the author's takes on some of the things that happened to Joan Didion. Right in the beginning, in the introduction, the author kind of frames Joan Didion as sort of like iron-willed person who has crafted meticulously and in a very manipulative way a version of themselves that is the version that they want everybody to see, and it is the version that they have sold in order to sell books, but it is not actually who they are under the surface. And while to a certain degree that can be said about any of us, especially if we exist on social media in any way, we know that social media is a highlight reel, and the work that you put out into the world might very well also be a highlight reel. But we know that in all of these cases there's actually a real person behind this who has actual thoughts and feelings, some of which might be like extremely depressed or extremely anxious or might not align with that like happy image. And Nulik does not do Joan Didion the solid of believing that her internal life might have been chaotic, or that her internal life might have been like very depressed or very anxious, or that any of the things that she says in any of her memoirs are any kind of true version of her. And instead what she like positions her as is this sort of like master puppeteer who's like moving people around in her life like set pieces in order to do this kind of very raw, very visceral journalism. And it's just a weird freaking take. It's a weird take from somebody who is a biographer and who also is kind of like moving through the world creating art based on other people. It's just very weird. Yeah. Yeah, it's really weird, right? No, I wouldn't recommend it to people either. I mean, if you're gonna make that much noise, you have to at least be on the camera. Alright, so let's move on to more positive climates, shall we? And let's talk about the 2 books that I absolutely adored reading in January, because there were 2 redemptions. And the first one of them is one that I really and honestly did not expect to be telling you guys about in a tops and bottoms. I honestly thought that it was going to end up being one of those like middling books that I was like, oh, it's just fine. Once again, it's me looking for something that just doesn't work for me, but no. The book that I am talking about is Till Death Do Us Part by Rose Black, and I think it would be fair to call this let me just roll back all the previous versions of me who said this would never be their thing. I think it is fair to call this a cozy queer romance. Y'all know how much I hate the word cozy, because in case you've missed this rant in the last couple of months from me, the term cozy kinda ruining my life right now. Anyway, all of this to say, I don't usually like books that are marketed as cozy. I need there to be a plot or like some sort of actual peril or purpose to get me through a story. One of the reasons that I don't often read a lot of literary fiction where nothing really happens and it's just a character reflecting on their life. I also don't usually like romance. It is definitely something that I've been finding every now and then I'll find a book that really works for me, but predominantly for the most part I'm just kind of bored. So what I'm telling you essentially are that all things were against this book for me to like. And I'm gonna be perfectly honest, I don't know if this book just found me at the right time, if it was that the narrator was particularly good because they were, or if there was just something in the setup of this story that worked for me, but OMG, I freaking adored this. I think one of the hooks that pulled me into this is the idea that has been popping up more and more in fantasy recently of older retired characters having to get like dragged back into action when they absolutely are over it. They have moved on with their lives, they are no longer interested. In some cases they have like children, or maybe they're now responsible for like a town of people or something. They have very much hung up their axe, as it were, and because of that they also are now facing all of those things that middle-aged people are facing. Their bodies can't do the things that they used to do. I'm specifically thinking about other books that I've read really recently that have done this, like Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Ames. You can definitely see this theme being present in my reading in other genres, particularly in the thriller genre, where I absolutely freaking love a middle-aged person who is not an investigator in any way, or somebody who is genuinely a pensioner getting involved. So for all of those reasons, the actual like plot of this and the logistics of this just really worked for me, but also really loved the characters. I really bought how invested they were in each other. It was so nice to read about an established relationship. Like, maybe this is my thing in romance, you guys. Maybe an established relationship where an external forces puts it in peril is the thing that I need to be reading more in romance. Maybe I need romances that start in the middle. Maybe when people are like, I don't know, married and have kids and a mortgage and stuff, and external forces threaten their established relationship, because that's another thing that I really like. Other things threatened the sanctity of their very happy marriage, and I really enjoyed that. So I don't know, maybe that's my niche. Do more romances like that exist out there? You guys tell me. And then finally, for my last top of this video, it should come as absolutely no surprise to you guys that I picked up a true crime in January. It is a genre that I have spent a relatively large amount of time with over the last 10 years or so, but I will say that in the last maybe like 3 years, while I've been working through a bunch of my own stuff and anxiety and like childhood stuff has been like quite close to the surface, I did kind of take a little break. I have definitely in the last 3 years read a few true crime books, but they are fewer and further between, and I feel like now I'm in a slightly better place. I'm definitely starting to pick them up again with more of my usual verve, and I guess that's just like a PSA from me to you, that even if you enjoy something, if it is triggering you in any way, it's okay to like put it down and come back to it later when you're in a better mental place. Like, that hobby or that thing is not going to go away just because you've stepped away from it. Who are they and what is this self-care thing that they're talking about? Anyway, the final book on this list is Dancing with the Octopus by Deborah Harding. I picked this book up after seeing a ton of reviews online that were just absolutely in love with it, and so I took a chance on it, not knowing very much about it, but this book just proves that sometimes that practice is a really good one. So this one is about Deborah Harding, the author, who in 1978 was walking between 2 school functions in 2 different buildings and was abducted off of the street. And interspersed between the narrative of this thing actually happening, we get Deborah in like 2006, I think, re-attending the parole hearing of the person who did this to her. This book is written in a very unique format. I wouldn't say experimentally, but it is definitely written unusually, and the format really worked for me. There's a concept in the fibre arts world that's like a potato chippy project, where you just want to get to the next line or the next repeat or the next part of it, because every time you finish it there's another small goal in front of you, and this book felt very much like that because it is written in entirely vignettes. Some of them are only 1 page long. The longest I think is like a 4-page one. Each of the vignettes has a title which says something like "in which I deal with," or "in which I grapple with," or "in which I investigate," and then in between there's just blank pages, and so it always makes you feel like, oh, just read another one, oh, just read another one, and then you hit a cliffhanger on something that has happened to Deborah, and you're like, oh my god, I need to know what happened, I'm just gonna read another one. And because of that, this book, which is like 450 pages-ish long and has quite small fonts, so although there is a lot of like blank pages inserted in there, it's not actually all that short realistically. It flies by, it goes by so quickly. One of the things that I absolutely loved in the structure of this one is those cliffhanger moments. Not because I think that a memoir of a true crime or a person telling you about their experience should read like a thriller wherein there are moments where there's a different reveal or a different cliffhanger at the end of every chapter to kind of keep you going, but more in the vein of it's kind of like you're sitting with Deborah while she self-counsels herself, while she actively in real time is working through some of these things and how they're related to each other, because you very much do get a non-linear format in this. There are scenes during the abduction, there are scenes now in the present day where she's travelling with her husband to this parole hearing. There are scenes interspersed where she kind of tackles her childhood, which was also not wonderful and also played a massive part in how she reacted to the things that happened to her. So yeah, this one hit home for me as well in a couple of different places, but it's so good. And if you are somebody who really enjoys a true crime documentary, particularly the kind that do sort of a reverse engineered investigation from the present day into things that happened years and years ago, I think that you will really love this one. So that is it, guys. That was our first tops and bottoms of 2025. 1 foot forward on getting back onto the good habit tracker of it all. If you got all the way through this video, then leave me a star emoji down below for however you do your star rating systems, and also tell me one top and one bottom from your January reading month. What was your best book from January and your worst one? If you are new here and you would like to see how I get on with my Finish It February TBR, then hit that subscribe button down below. And if you are one of my returning subscribers who is more than delighted to see tops and bottoms making its reappearance, then please hit that like button on the way out, because it really does help my channel. And I will speak to you guys really soon. Bye!